Start roughly an hour and a half ago. We got sidetracked on some important things, but we are here. We said it's going to happen. It's happening. I am joined by two of my favorite people, one of which you probably know quite well if you've listened to these podcasts before. Raz, please introduce yourself.
Hey.
Great introduction.
Oh, I had to introduce myself. Yeah. Also something you may be used to before after listening to a few of these casts. I am Rise. Good to see everybody.
Give a little bit of your experience with Hearthstone, just so people have a little backdrop.
All right, Hearthstone, I finally got talked into it by a number of people, including UB, because I avoided it forever, because I knew that once I went face first into it, I would be playing it all the time. Sure enough, I started out beginning of the year, I want to say, really took to a couple of different classes. I've done a lot of Warlock. Yes, I've done some Face Hunter. I've done a little bit of Pally. And I've worked my way up. Most recently, right before the expansion dropped, finally got myself up to almost Legend, not quite, rank 1, ready to go. Expansion drops, goodbye rank 1. I couldn't get there. Heartbreak City, oh my goodness. But I've got a lot of experience both in ranked ladder play, getting up until Legend, also doing a lot of arena play. That's my background.
All right. And I'm also joined by a very good buddy of both Rise and I, who goes by the name of...
Original. Yes. Very original name.
Indeed.
Probably best know me for my 20 Rogue, but I play all Twink brackets and endgame. In my Hearthstone experience, I've gone up to rank 3, won a couple of tournaments, and I don't know. But
Beats me regularly with his hand block.
I can beat all sorts of good players, but I can never win in ladder.
It's a different thing. Like, people don't realize that how arenas work and how ranked games work and how playing friends work are totally different things, and you can be good at one and suck at the other.
Yes.
That feels like the definition of the way that all three of us work together. But I would like to touch on the intricacies of that later. But what I would like to talk about now is just we have a new expansion for Hearthstone. And it's introduced some mechanics that are pretty freaking crazy.
Yeah.
And I guess it should be no surprise to anyone that plays Hearthstone that Inspire is that mechanic. And Primal, or Original, I'm sorry, you and I have had talks about that beforehand. So, like, what is your... I guess what? It's been live for 2 days. What are your initial thoughts on the Inspire mechanic?
Well, before TGT, or the Grand Tournament, which was the patch which introduced Inspire, was released, I thought that it would be bad and wouldn't be played at all, because I thought that the tempo would be too slow, since you'd have to play cards 2 turns ahead to be able to get the full juice out of it, or else it would be removed the turn after you played it. But since it's been released, I have changed my opinion on it, because I realized that a lot of decks have incorporated cards which allow you to maintain this in the Inspire cards for longer turns to attain the potential of the card. And that's what's been really strong about it, especially now that decks have been being built solely around Inspire or the card effects that Inspire gives. The example is Totem Shaman, which uses Inspire to very, very well by granting totems which it spawns using its hero power buffs.
And that's something I actually wanted to start with, and I'm glad you brought it up. And
really good point,
I know
too.
the people listening don't know, because it's been, Christ, I think a year and a half since we've had a last Hearthstone podcast. But Chamois has always been what I play in Hearthstone. And when Original and I were talking, I'm like, yeah, looking at these cards, I feel like there's room for a totem-based Chamois deck. And then he's like, yeah, I went 15-0 on a Chamois deck. He's like, yeah, all these people like are just hitting Legendary and losing like 1 game out of 20 on this totem-based Chamois deck. And while that in itself is batshit crazy / insane for reasons that everyone that's played Hearthstone should know, this is what I thought was the most crazy. Totems feel sticky.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, Rise, think about how many times, like, you've played me, 100 times? I play Chamois 95% of those times. Originally, you've played me 100 times. I play Chamois, 95% of those times. I put down a goddamn totem. You're like, yeah, it's dead.
Yeah.
But what is the change in the meta that somehow makes it feel like on turn 2 I drop that totem, and it's like, I don't know if I can get rid of that. God forbid that shit sticks to turn 4, and then in turn 4 is really, I guess, where it starts to actually mean something. And then God forbid you hit turn 5, that Thunder Bluff Color or whatever it's called sticks, and then that Inspire starts to accrue.
Yeah,
there's the key. I think
Go ahead. Go for it.
A lot of hero powers were kind of tack on things in a lot of the classes. Yeah, you use them if you're a face hunter. If you get should you put the damage or should you put the minion out? Are you the priest? Do you want to buff a minion, by basically healing them, or do you want to put a minion out? Your hero power was the alternate go-to before Inspire came along, where it was like, all right, I really don't have the mana to work out the math just the way I need, so I'll get a couple extra armor, or I'll get the heal, or I get this. It was just kind of this bolt-on extra, and the reason you chose a particular class besides the cards they had was because of the hero power and whatever bolt-on extra that you had. Inspire changed that because it turned your hero power into a multiplier. So I think that things like Shaman Totems are now more sticky, because before, you could look at a Shaman Totem and be like, you know what, I'll nuke it next turn, not that big a deal. Now it's a real choice. Now you have to be like, well, I'll go after the minion he just played, and I'll leave the totem there, but if I leave the totem there, next turn if he plays something that buffs the totem, I'm kind of screwed. You only had to worry about, like, Flame Tongue Totem doing that a couple times. Like, there's only 2 of those in the deck, so it's not going to happen.
Also, it's like, if you're playing Priest, you put down the 1/3 Cleric, it's like, awesome, he got Flame Tongue. That's a free heal.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the situation where there was a lot more, and we see it now as limitations because Inspire's in the game. But before, it was like, all right, totems are an afterthought. You can leverage them, maybe not. Now you have to make a choice.
A really big thing is that it's incorporating cards which have been really, really bad, very low tier previously, and now they've become top tier because of the introduction to these new mechanics. A good example of this is Totemic Might, which was never played. Give your totems +2 health. Like, why would you ever want that? You want your totems dead, you know?
Yeah.
But now, +2 health on your totems, they're even more stickier, you know? It's just unbelievable now.
I will say this to Totemic Might. I've tried it before, going way back when it wasn't worth using. But Rise, do you remember when you played it against me? I'm like, what the fuck is this? This does not make sense. And like, Rise actually made a deck that kind of worked, but kind of didn't work. But it was like, God damn it, that's creative as hell. But now it's not only creative. It's like, especially for someone like you, Rise, where it's like, I used Totemic Might in the past. I don't want to use the word success, but let's say use the word to frustrate.
That's half the fun of the game right there.
Yes, especially when you're doing our different versions of games, which we'll get into at some point. But like now you can really do things with that. Like Totemic Might is a legit, like almost ace in the hole.
Yeah. It really is. Like, how many times have you seen me play Totemic Might with like 4 totems and you're like, oh, I just lose? He's going to play every single Shaman card which buffs a totem, and I'm going to lose to Bloodlust. You know?
Whereas before, as a Shaman, just getting enough minions on the board to make Bloodlust even worthwhile.
Like, I have never had more minions than 4 as a Shaman.
As a Shaman, right?
And now I have like 8 every single time I play.
Well, no, and you know what else this did was when we were playing the games earlier, and I was making a Priest deck, which is the complete opposite spectrum of what we're talking about now, and that's like the Velen.
Double heal.
Yes. And then you put the Justicar and all
true.
that shit down, and it's just like, oh, and then Shadow or Akanai.
Nexus champion.
And it gets crazy. But it's like, oh my god. Like, there's so much new shit opened up.
Yeah.
One of the things I think... Go ahead.
Okay. I think this is going off on a little bit, but I personally can see why this is actually really good, because they didn't add any cards which are good to aggro lock, mech hunter, even rogue.
Yes.
Which were pretty strong and people didn't like because there was absolutely no counterplay. For example, for face hunter, you don't play anything anymore. Like, there's absolutely no TGT card that you play in face hunter now. And same with aggro lock. There's absolutely no card that you play in aggro lock in TGT. But they've really, really expanded. I think we're sticking on Shaman too much, because I think even if Shaman is the most OP class, I actually think they've deserved it. They've been the worst class since
They're like
the beginning of
Warriors and
Hearthstone.
WoW.
Yeah. But with Warriors, they got buffed very, very heavily. And Control Warrior is also a really good thing, because before, every single time you faced a Warrior, it's a Grim Patron Warrior, you're going to get comboed for 60 damage.
Don't get me started on that shit.
But now it's a really very, very Control Warrior, with the introduction of Varian Rin, with the introduction of Bash, with the introduction of, what's it called? Alex Strauss' Champion. You have stuff like that which are making control decks very, very important. And it's very, very weird, because you look at these cards and you say, oh, you're playing a very control deck. All these decks are very, very controlling. You're stalling out to the late game. But because of Inspire, it's not really control. It's like a really aggro deck. Because of Inspire, if you inspire something, it can suddenly go from, I have 4 minions on the board which do 1 damage, to I have 4 minions on the board which do 10 damage. It's just a very weird curve now that we have Inspire.
It really is. And then if you
That's
get
a good way
that
of putting it.
Justicar down there too, I mean, it's like you can literally choose what you want. I was playing a game last night. Like, I just made like whatever ghetto ass deck I thought would work as Chamois, which amazingly, every single other fucking person decided that would be the best deck to play as Chamois.
Yeah.
And Mangry's watching, and he's like, what the fuck, man? I'm like, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure I have a Manatide Totem that has roughly 12 damage and 10 health.
Oh my god.
So, I don't know what you want me to do right now, but I have a full board of shit where I actually have to sacrifice my healing totem that has, like, I don't know, 5 damage and 4 health. Just so I can inspire the rest of my totems.
Right?
Yeah.
When you're in a position where you have to dump minions, you're looking for a way to dump minions to buff the rest of them, that's like, whoever thought you'd see that. I think the biggest change I've noticed so far with the new expansion is that before coming in, people, especially because the older stuff has been out for a while, you know which cards are going to be played at which turns. You have a general feel for it. You know where the threats come from. And it's not just a matter of, oh, well, there's new cards out there, so there's new threats. It was done in such a way, and it's a tribute to Blizzard for doing this, where the combinations, there's a greater number of combinations, and it's harder to tell what you should go after on your opponent's side of the board.
Yeah.
That's the big deal here.
And
where
because
it's like,
of Inspire, you can't know. You can't know what your opponent is running. You don't know what deck. Maybe that's just because it's been out for such a short time. But I think even when you get more defined decks, there's just so many ways to actually play it that you don't know. You can't really predict your opponent.
I really think you're right, because it's not just like you're looking at this expansion. And it goes back to, like, when we were talking, it's like, I completely forgot that, what's the 6/6 reduces mana, that's the 5/5. I was like,
Emperor. Yeah.
Completely forgot he was there until I played someone. I was like, that was a steady, you have to have that shit in your deck, because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did I fail so terribly at remembering, dude, put that in your deck? And I'm watching this, and, like, I went, I don't know, like 10 to 20 and 0 just on this ghetto ass totem chamois deck I made. Like,
yeah,
this is not the same game, and it shouldn't be the same game because they released a new expansion. But it also really shouldn't be that just my random terrible deck making ass is like, oh, dude, we're good. This is gonna carry you forward.
So there's the difference between this expansion and the previous ones. The previous ones changed the way the cards interacted by adding things to it, where it's like, okay, before you might use a certain card with your deck, like, okay, I'm playing a Face Hunter, or I'm playing an Aggro Lock, or I'm playing a Control Warrior. It's like, okay, now the new expansion came out, and here's a card that did better than the other one, the same function previously. If you're playing a Control Lock and you were using the 2/3 mech, the Harvest mech, what's it called?
Harvest Golem.
Thank you, the Harvest Golem. Now you're using the Imp Boss, because it's like those little changes like that. This is the first time I've seen an expansion where it's like, okay, not only do some card replacements work better than others, but the combos have the versatility of all decks just went up. So you can find a deck that will all of a sudden change direction in the middle of the game because someone's like, you know, I was gonna go Control, but I've got the board domination right now. It's Inspire time. It is aggro time. We are going to put the pedal down.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about the shift in what Inspire can give to different decks in different, like the way it can shift tempos. And this goes back to what you and I were talking about earlier, again, Primal, in that, what if you're using the Joust mechanic? I mean, that seems like a deliberate way that Blizzard went ahead and was like, we understand that the rush is fucking awful, and we want to figure out how to fix this. And this might not be the best way, but at least it's a freaking option where it's, dude, what's your Joust gonna be? You're not going to be. What's the dude that played the Black Knight that died, or the Dark Knight Joker died? Doesn't matter. But like, you know, he'd be his jousting ass motherfucker, and he goes down. Well, you don't get your charge. You don't get your divine shield. You don't get your taunt. But if your card is higher, guess what? You just got an insane advantage just by the default fact that your deck contains more higher cards. And if you're running, say, an old school straight up face fuck hunter, or an old school let's beat a bitch out warlock before the game really can have a chance to develop, you're running at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of being able to figure out how to be able to work with that and to counter that. Like, what do you do then if you want to play an aggro deck? How do you design an aggro deck now that has to account for the fact that you've got a good rush?
Time, they've added cards which still allow this. Like a good example is
exactly, yeah.
Which makes it so that Totem Shaman is useless and Inspire is useless, and that really allows some decks to still be strong. But I think they've decided to lean against that now because I think that they've realized that they want this to actually be like more of a card game instead of a rush phase, but by still allowing that to be a viable strategy, but just not as strong.
Well, I was reading something where there were a few different metas that should exist in a healthy card game. There's the rush. There's the I don't want to use turtle, but basically, let's say turtle.
Yeah, Control Warrior.
Yeah, like basically rush, mid, late, and tech.
Tech, yeah.
Let's say. So, and it's obviously going to be very difficult to balance all of those at the same time. It seems like for the past few versions of Hearthstone, there's only been one of those that really, really worked if you're in the general population. And that is, hey, what's up, man? You feeling good? Yeah. Boom! Right to the face.
Right.
Unless you were just exceptionally skilled in what you did, you just wanted to go straight for a D, slap it against the cheek, and you move on to the next person.
Yeah.
But with what's going on now, I know it's early and I know it's speculative, but it seems like there are going to be new things coming to us. Like, what do you guys think about that?
I think that you made a really good point about balance in there, where as much as rush decks were out of control for a while, and there's ways to counter that, but at the bottom line, it's still like, it was a legit issue. It's a legit issue. But now, even though rush decks have a harder time, the important point is they're in a position where they're still enough of a threat that all the other playstyles have to account for that. You can't just throw rush decks out the window and be like, oh, well, rush, I can take care of that now, so it's not that big a deal. A rush deck can still catch you off guard, and that's what makes the game so much fun, is that whether you play an early, mid, late, or tech style, you have to account for all the other styles. Knowing that you're going to have some strengths in some places and some weakness in some others. If they had just thrown rush out the window, I think you'd be absolutely right. The game would have less depth. The threat has to be there. There has to be some viability to rush in order to keep things interesting and varied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think even looking back at like what they've done every expansion, like when Hearthstone was released, no one actually knew it was good, and rush actually wasn't that great. It was a very, very mid-range.
No, it was a Murloc. Let's be honest. It was a Murloc face.
Yep. Yeah, but you saw very mid-range decks. They didn't which play like other card games. And once Nox was released, once GVG was released, once BlackRock was released, it expanded and changed each time. And I think this is the biggest change that they've had since the release of the game. Since it's gone from more tech cards or early game cards and things which lay out the foundry of your deck, like in Naxxramas, to GVG, where it's like you can make actual decks around this, but you still want to run basically what you normally do instead of, it's not all mech decks, which really allowed for more face. Then there was BlackRock, which allowed for very tech. And now we have TGT, which actually just completely changes decks. So it's a very radical change, but I think it's very good for the game.
What do you guys think about this? That when they released the BlackRock expansion, I can only assume that they wanted to bring some balance. And we've played to varying degrees of success. I mean, obviously you guys, ladder-wise, have had more. If we're playing against each other, we know I still win.
Right?
But it doesn't feel like there was a real balance met.
Yeah.
And now with this, it seems like they're like, all right, we see what we failed with. And with all of the expansions before, I mean, especially Goblins versus Gnomes, when you want to go like Mech Shaman, or not Mech Shaman, I'm sorry, Mech Mage, or something like that. Or God forbid, if you want to go the complete antithesis of that, the Freeze Mage, and get the fucking Doomsayer out there.
So much fun.
Yeah, no. But I mean, generally, it was still, I mean, that Mech Mage dominated. That Face Hunter dominated. Anything that could get out the block, Usain Bolt style, and run ahead was going to be the victor. And now with this, with the Inspire mechanic, there's a lot that the players have at their option to say, you know what? Let's go hard. Let's go hard at the front. And original, you had that, say, that Druid card. That was badass. Like, what was it, 1 or 2 mana? What was that card?
Yeah, 2 mana, 3/2 or discharge. Very, very strong.
And that's badass to start your game. Or, like, what if you want to give it a little bit of, and you want to let the Inspire mechanic draw? What if you're a Chamois, you want your totems to stick? I don't know how that changed so much.
Yeah, but it's because of the very, very strong tech cards and very, very strong just cards in general.
Yeah, and
which allow this to happen.
It makes a change too, and like this is something like at the very beginning where you'd have something a mind control tech, like you got to have that in your deck, and it really fell out of favor. I can't imagine. I mean, I know there are going to be decks where it's like you don't want a mind control tech, but if Chamois, like Totem Lord or whatever you want to call it, is going to be the Zeus of freaking decks, like, I don't know, maybe you want to take one of those for you.
Yeah.
And it's going to change things. But it
For
also
sure.
changes it for the good in a way that maybe we can run up front. Maybe we can make it mid. Maybe we can make it late game.
Well, there it is. I think that's the main difference we're seeing between this expansion and the previous ones. There were, if you want to play an aggro deck, it was just kind of taken for granted that you're playing a face hunter. You might be playing an aggro lock. You could do it warrior, but it's not likely. You could do it rogue. There was a time for that. Pally got really popular lately. There's a way you can play a Pally aggro deck. It's kind of hard to do it for other classes. Like there was this whole spectrum of, yes, there's like there's the top classes for doing a rush deck. There's the top classes for doing a control deck. There's even the top classes for doing a mill deck. I love mill decks. I'm a hobbyist with mill decks. I've got 4 different mill decks for 4 different classes, but everybody knows Druid mill decks are the best. That was just kind of how it was. TGT comes along and gives us cards where all of that's up in the air right now. Maybe it's entirely possible that thanks to the Murloc Knight that summons more Murlocs, that a Warrior Murloc deck might be a real thing now.
You mean Pally?
I would go with Warrior, actually. I would go
Wait,
with
are
a
we
Warrior.
thinking of 2 different cards? I just want to clarify that. I thought there was a Pally card that summoned Murloc.
Oh my gosh, that might be a Pally
Yeah,
only card.
Murloc, Pally Murloc is pretty good right now.
Okay, so maybe I got it confused. So yeah, Pally is what I meant. So a Pally Murloc deck might be a real thing. You could do it in the past, but there were other Murloc decks that were better than Pally. I had that Murloc Knight summon up another Murloc Knight yesterday.
But also, what about these
like,
cards,
oh my God.
Raz? Like, and these are just, it doesn't matter what class you are. There's summon a random Pally card. There's summon a 1/1 Silverhand Knight. And, like, I look at cards like that, and I'm like, there's gotta be a way to make a badass Pally deck.
And I think there's got to be a way to make a lot of badass decks that are hidden in there because the combinations are so much greater now. There are so many more options. It's not just, we replace a couple minions with these better ones or these few things here. People got creative and found a way to make a Pally Rush deck lately. They found a way to do a couple interesting twists on there. This one feels different. This expansion feels like we are going to see twists for a while.
Yeah, I agree.
But like,
that's exciting.
What do you think the twists are, original? Like, do you have any idea, or is it just like, yes, there's gonna be some crazy shit that happens?
I think that we think that it's going to be cards which are. I don't know how to say this.
Just say it, bro.
We think that it's going to be like they're going to release stuff, or the meta is going to change to completely counter Inspire.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how that'll happen. It could just be like the return of aggro, or like a really, really weird control deck. You know?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's spot on. There's always, when something comes out strong, there's always a backlash. There's always something on there. I noticed that when going up the ladder, where there were so many Grim Patron decks that
don't get me
half the time they were right. And when you have the Face Hunter too, right, where it's like, before Grim Patron became a major thing and Face Hunter was blowing up the charts, everybody learned, like, look, even if you're playing an aggro deck, you need to stick in a couple extra taunts, because if you don't, a Face Hunter is going to burn you down. It might burn you down anyway, but that's how you take down a Face Hunter, just a couple extra taunts, and the whole thing falls apart for a Face Hunter. Same thing happened with the Grim Patron, like, you needed a couple extra clears, because if you don't have those clears ready to go, a Grim Patron's taking you out. I think you're spot on, Original. It's going to be, with Inspire being so strong right now, people are like, all right, how do I counter decks that are going to be based on people using their hero power a lot, given that there's a lot of variety in how that works.
What do you guys think about this? Because, you have that text, right? And that text means a lot. And the only way to get rid of it is basically what? A silence, a sheep, a hex or just make that card disappear. So do you guys think that perhaps, like, say, a Hootbird or that 3/4 or 4/3, I forget what it is.
We could be looking at just like 5-6 silences in a deck.
So you say that, and I'm like, there's no way. And then I'm like, you know what? It's entirely... There's, for the same reason that people had to put extra taunts in the deck, well, there's only 4 silences in the game if you don't include the class-specific ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be something where it's like, all right, well, you need to run more than just 2 Hootbirds. Even 2 Hootbirds is a lot of people. You might need those. They're slow draws. A 3/4 with a silence, that's a... Or I guess it's
something I've seen... Every single person I've played, from what, 25 to like, I don't know, 15 or 14 in what I've done, has had that in their deck. And they've been like, oh, what's up, bro? Bang! On my 5-drop Chamois that gives the 2 Inspire to totems. Like, every single time. And I'm like, where did this come from? Like, what is this? It is like 2 days of which they automatically adapted to it. I'm like, well, at least it's not a Hootbird, because Hootbird has a lot of negative connotation with me. So
yeah, it's true.
It's a big deal, and that's the kind of counterpunch that we're going to be seeing increasing there. But the trade-off for that is when you're running more than 2 silences in the deck, then you're starting to curb down your own ability to be able to do stuff on the field. Silences are defensive plays. If you don't have enough offense, then it's all well and good, but your silences die, and then here comes the next wave of crap that you got to figure out what to do with. So it's by itself, it's not going to be the only answer, and it'll be part of an answer, but that getting the whole answer is going to be the bigger challenge in the coming days.
Indeed.
Well then, let me start with you asking this question, Original, and then Arise, I'd like you to follow up. Original, what do you think is going to be the strongest deck going forward? And don't take the easy answer saying Totem Shaman, because it breaks my heart.
Control Warrior. Control Warrior.
And why is that?
It's just... It counters Inspire because of all the cards it gets, like Deathbite, weapons. You have a lot of cards which you get card draw on armor, and you're able to stall it out. And then once you get late game, you're by far the strongest late game boss. By far. So in my opinion, I actually don't think it will be the strongest. I don't think we will know for a while, like a very, very long time, what the strongest will be, because we'll have to see what counters what deck and what counters that deck for a very long time until you find a deck like Handlock in Season 4 where just nothing countered it ever. Mm-hmm. We have to get to that point, but I think top 3 probably until we know the strongest for now will be Control 100%.
All right, well, Rise, what's your thoughts on that?
Stole my thunder. I would have said the same thing, but with that said, there's a shift. It seems to me, in my experience, that as the meta shifts, the classes that step up shift with it. So that Control Warrior is going to be front and center for a little bit, and that's a mid to late game focus. So if you can hang on with the Control Warrior long enough, I think we're going to start seeing late game decks start to ascend from there. I think you can start looking out for...
real quick. Mm-hmm. I think that Control Warrior is actually very, very, very interesting, because although it's going along with all the Inspire decks, all the late game decks, which are all TGT cards, which allow for this Inspire effect, the Control Warrior itself will use no Inspire cards. So I find that very interesting.
That is interesting.
That actually does make things so crazy, because it's like, oh, dude, we're still going to be good. Fuck the new expansion. I know what you think we're going to do, but nah, bro.
They're using TGT cards, but they're not using any of the Inspire cards. They'll obviously use Master Jouster, since they're using the Joust mechanic, since they're using very late game cards to get that Taunt and Divine Shield to stall out longer. They're obviously using Variant Rains. This is the best card which is being released, and they'll use Bash, but that's just a strong card. They are not using what this this TGT expansion was intended, which I find very amusing. Yeah.
It's almost like our first expansion counter deck.
Yeah.
Like this deck was made to counter the main mechanic there, and it's having success right now. I think as things go on and we find people who use more creative ways to be able to use silences, board clears, basically to start taking control decks apart, we're going to see a shift towards some late game. Like it's even greater emphasis on that, and that's when you start seeing things get varied. Because once people really start going for late game shifts and they start playing late games decks, that's when the door opens for weird ass stuff to happen with new types of rush decks and for new like front to mid games.
For a very, very strange control hand lock. Very, very strange hand lock. We're going to see like we're going to be seeing a hand lock with like inspire cards, which make it so that you take no damage. It'll be very, very weird. I'm going to call this
6-drop, so they take no damage and still pick a card. I mean, that's huge.
Yeah,
we're gonna be seeing cards like that for sure.
And that's a good example where it's like, okay, the natural instinct is like, okay, well, let him, like, he just drew a card out that we got to nuke that minion, and the question's gonna be like, well, do you want to spend your
like,
board's capabilities? You want to just offense to nuke that minion?
Yeah,
this is one thing I've
noticed.
Exactly.
It might just be.
Like, I'll put down. I got lucky, and I got the Mistweaver. Or Mistcaller, or whatever the hell it is.
Mistcaller is insane.
For the chamois thing, and it's like a 4/4. But once you drop that down, man, that's just what it is. But it's a 4/4, and like everyone's like, that shit needs to die ASAP, and they will use everything in their power to kill it. And I'm like, it's a 4/4 card, bro.
I thought this was sort of amusing. I just went on Hearthstone. I looked for the highest rated warrior, and it's a combo warrior. I'm like, oh, TGT combo warrior. It's gonna be Inspire. I want to see, and the title is best deck when TGT comes out. You click it. You know what it is?
What is it?
Still Patron.
Okay, we're done right now.
It's literally the exact.
No, we're done. We're done. There's nothing else we're gonna do here. You say your ribbons, and Rise, you say your ribbons, and we'll finish this up.
Oh, Rise at Hey Rise on Twitter. Thank you all for joining us there. And oh my god, it's been a fun night.
Yeah. I don't have much. I guess I have a Twitter, but I don't use it much, so I have nothing. Check out Walk the Flock of Seagulls, Bleeding Hollow, Order an Alliance, or Recruiting. Yeah, that's it.
Maybe next week we'll start the Hearthstone stream less than 3 hours after the actual podcast ends.